Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Infrastructure Management Vendors Must Migrate Up the Value Chain and Expand Integration for Emerging Technologies. I'm Justin Sargent, and I'll be hosting today's session. Today's webinar will share insights from our Infrastructure Management Software Vendor Benchmark. If you'd like to learn more about this report, please reach out to myself or one of the analysts after the presentation. Before we begin, there are a few items I'd like to cover. First, I'll be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the previous webinars we've posted. Second, I'll be following up with all of you via email tomorrow afternoon with the recording link to today's presentation as well as with the slides. And finally, we welcome questions on the material we're presenting today. Please send any questions you have to the Q&A function, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. I'd like to introduce the analyst presenting today. Geoff Woollacott is Principal Analyst in TBR's software practice and oversees the syndicated research team for the software and BI service practice. The software practice is what produces the report for today's webinar. Andrew Smith is an analyst in TBR's software practice and leads quarterly syndicated research of top infrastructure and systems management software vendors. And with that, let me hand this over to the analyst.
All right, thank you, Justin. If we can advance the slides a little bit. And what we'll be doing today is taking a look at an overview of the infrastructure management benchmark for the results that ended in June. We will also be taking a look at the overarching themes and insights from that benchmark. The highlights that we have for this is the notion of the vendors and their need to increase the reliance on the channel partners, as well as an evolving definition, at least in TBR's opinion, as what that means, because increasingly we believe any look a vendor does at a channel partner in that ecosystem has got to start considering end customers as part of the partner base. And that's a bit of a different shift, but it's a shift being driven by openness and by the speed at which people want to see innovation be brought out to market. Secondly, we'll be looking at the emerging technologies that are transforming the industry. I just recently released a piece on containers that was more of a qualitative assessment and calibration of what we see as the big themes there, that we are intending to launch an end customer survey to calibrate better the shifts that are going on there. And then lastly, as far as the highlights go, are the customers ready to embrace this? What are they going to need in order to adopt and adapt to the new ways in which technology is being delivered to them? So if we can advance the slide, the first thing we have is a bit of a paid ad for you in terms of what the syndicated research is that comes out of the software practice. TBR itself covers, you see the companies on the left, we cover about 180 different firms. These are the core ones within the portfolio. The benchmarks, again, TBR has about 40 of them. The ones that are under my direction are the application software vendor benchmark, this one, the infrastructure management benchmark, and then business intelligence. We take a look at it, and we're giving a webinar on that tomorrow around what the vendor activity is, and then more importantly is the business intelligence software buying behavior and the trends and shifts that are going on there. If you can advance the slide. Now, the reason for this is to give you an overview. If you've attended these, you've seen this before, but we split the vendors that we cover. Some are in both of these benchmarks between infrastructure and applications. We have them color-coded because we do take a look at the operating metric performance by these categorical groupings to see if there's any specific trends depending on are they, IM-centric, or are they a multi-line, or are they software only, among some of those different dissertations. So, what have we found, or what did we see at the end of 2Q15 with respect to what's going on within infrastructure management? And as I was saying to the team that's in the room with me before we got on the line, when I took this job a year ago, I thought the applications layer was going to be more interesting. And quite frankly, there's a heck of a lot more going on in the infrastructure management space, given it's not just a shift of how do you sell it or how does the end customer consume it. You also have to layer in a lot of new technologies to address the shift in the data fabric from an on-premise data center into a hybrid cloud environment where it can move anywhere and be accessed from any device. So the infrastructure management space has a lot more disruption going on, And we're seeing this in several different ways. Number one is operating margins are eroding. Now, the erosion there is happening for a number of different reasons. One is the increased competition from the legacy vendors to stay relevant. But number two, and more importantly, is the overarching shift, and you see this on the applications layer as well. This isn't just unique to infrastructure management, of the change from license to subscription and what that does to your operating models. We know it from text in Form 10Ks that talks about the ratable revenue, and you're going to recognize the expense in one quarter, but you can only get the revenue over a period as you recognize it ratably. That is one driver that's hitting it. You've also got the need to do a lot of investment in net new technologies that is also hitting them. So there's cannibalization of the core way that you went to market at the same time that you have to innovate around new technologies to stay relevant in the market. So the second point there runs to this very specifically in terms of cloud infrastructures and what you need from a management and control plane to take a look at that and embed it in with and peacefully coexist with your on-premise activities, as well as the billing and provisioning and metering and orchestration and security layers that are new requirements or require new approaches to old issues because you have to do it in a virtualized world rather than in the physical world. And lastly, we'll get into this notion of the platforms, which is vendors realize they can't go it alone. The speed at which end customers demand innovation means you can't do it all internally. You have to do it through partnerships, through tuck-in acquisitions, and through the creation of, if not truly open ecosystem environments for contributions like an open source or an OpenStack or Cloud Foundry, but you at least have to have within your own ecosystem broader participation from end users as well as your partners. And there's a lot going on there, particularly with strategic SIs. So with that, let's get into some of the numbers, which is a start. These are our standard bubble charts, just to orient you to the slide a little bit. You see the color coding, which is the groupings that we're talking about. IM-centric is orange, hardware-software multi-lines is the light blue, and the purple is the software multi-lines. So when you take a look at this, what you can see is the operating margin's running at about 16.5% this quarter, and the revenue shrank 3%. A lot of that revenue shrinkage is that transformation from license to subscription, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But if you take a look at these, we have those two sort of in the center, which is VMware and Red Hat. Are those the new standard of performance? We're much more bullish on Red Hat. They've been at it for a lot longer time of essentially monetizing free software by building services around it. It's a lot of contribution coming in from the open source community that they then catch and turn into enterprise-grade services to wrap around that. So that's one that we believe a lot of folks should watch as a industry exemplar of how to be able to manage in the new world order of how you have to monetize. But then you see on the other side, you've got Oracle and IBM software, still highly profitable, not growing very much because they are making that transition from license to subscription. And the one thing I think we can say with certainty for those two large blue bubbles as well as Microsoft's purple one is that those are going to start shifting left. I think the operating margin is going to start to decline on that as they adjust and adapt into the new world that has a new normal with lower operating margins. It's a colloquialism used to discuss that is the notion of analog dollars to digital pennies. And this is what we're seeing from license to subscription. Andrew, is there anything you would add to this?
No, I just, I like this slide because I think it kind of gives, it foreshadows a little bit the way that the market's moving. We expect to see Red Hat start to move up and to the right, VMware possibly down to the left, and then looking at your major players like Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM, expect those bubbles to start to shrink, as they allocate resources differently and try and, pull in those net new subscription-based research streams.
Right. As they allocate the resources differently and as the end customer chooses to consume it differently. It's a little bit of both, and it's hard to say, are they leading the market or are they reacting to the market? But the bottom line is, regardless of who's taking lead here, customers and vendors, it's what's going on. So we can go to the next slide. This is where we get into just product revenue. So we're stripping out maintenance and we're stripping out professional services. Later, the next two slides will disaggregate between license and subscription. So this shows a much starker story here. If you look at that lower left, here are all the firms that are challenged, if you will, in the transformation from the license to subscription bubble. Microsoft stands out there on the right-hand side because they've been a little bit more successful in the monetization shift around at least their kind of consumer, and I don't mean business end user, I shouldn't say consumer, business end user software assets such as Office and Office 365. They're doing a very good job managing this transition and transformation. Then you see up in the upper right the subscription-only leaders. So they have a smaller bubble. We have that gray bubble I should have mentioned on all the slides to give you a reference point for the scale. That gray bubble is the billion-dollar size of these things. So you can see Salesforce and ServiceNow in the upper right are a little bit smaller. And then you have that high volatility. Citrix is one that I think needs to be noted as well as EMC, because they're both, while they're taking different approaches, they're both being pressured by the outside investors as they are adapting within this shift where the investors want the profit pools disaggregated and distributed out to the shareholders, whereas these firms need them to fund the innovation and transformation they're going to need in order to be able to stay relevant as they make this migration from on-prem licenses to sort of cloud-enabled subscriptions and the ability to manage hybrid cloud environments for their end customers. So if you jump to the next one, here's product or license revenue only. So you can see the majority of it. The revenue declined by 7.4%. So that's the bigger drag, where product revenue is only down a little bit over a point. This piece of it's down by 7, and you can see some of the bigger ones there are what are dragging down the average, while Microsoft is still able to stay a little bit above the waterline there in terms of what they're doing. Now, if you jump to the next slide, we may bounce back and forth. Here's the subscription model, where you can see a lot of these things that the average for the basket that we have in there, the 45.5% growth rate, or 43.5, sorry, my eyes are bad, 43.5% growth rate, that when you blend it with that 7% decline gives an aggregate of the 1.2. Now, we don't have all of the vendors in this benchmark disaggregated because some of them don't report it in a way that we feel we can get at it with a level of clarity, but we're going to push for the next quarter to have them all done, and I may have to try to assign some confidence scales for some of these because they will be a challenge to get disaggregated, but it's necessary to do because this is at the heart of the economic challenges that these firms are all facing while they try to innovate on new technology layers to inject into what they offer to market. Is there anything you would add here?
No.
So that covers the product components of what's been happening. We'll now jump into maintenance and professional services. On the maintenance line, as you can see here, they're all sort of struggling right around there. The total revenue contraction on that was a 5.4% dip. Now that is something that does not surprise us when you look at license erosion that's been going on, because maintenance typically is a 12-month lag. So therefore, it stands to reason that these things are going to start to decline. The other factor to the decline in there is services automation. That is a necessity as more and more of this does need to be automated, and the more that you do that to strip labor out of the delivery model in the pricing pressure that's going on, you're going to start cutting the price on the maintenance even as you renew it. But as we know for Oracle, maintenance and product revenue licenses are, that bucket for them is at about a 96% gross margin, and their cloud componentry is sitting at about a 40% gross margin today, although they make the claims that they'll be able to drive that up to 60 to 80 when they get to scale. But no matter how you do it, the gross margin that you're getting on that is going to be less. Therefore, the operating expenses you can attach to the go-to-market motion have to be reduced in concert, or else your bottom line is going to be in trouble.
Yeah, and I would add, just looking at some of the outliers, we've got Dell up there, and we kind of point, what we're estimating for Dell, obviously, since they don't report these lines anymore, the way we look at it, the way we estimate it is that a lot of the legacy maintenance revenue attributed to the software segment is maintaining because of how closely it's tied to their application form factors, their appliance form factors and the appliance products. So anything from storage, security, networking, management, folded into appliances and are, resonating with Dell's customer base.
Okay, so if we move to the professional services line, now what's going on here, as much as, well, there's several factors, but the comparison I want to make is when we've been modeling out the shift from license to subscription, what we believe we can say with a fair amount of accuracy is that the compression ratio, and when I mean compression ratio, what is it that you get in the first year? In the first year, $1 of license translates to about 33 cents for a software subscription. So it's a 3-to-1 compression ratio. Now, the outlying years are better, right? The $1 of license the second year will be somewhere between 15 and 20 cents. That 33 cents in the first year will be 33 cents, but the way that people try to upsell, it could go to 38 or 40 cents. So that's that transformation in terms of how the revenue flow is coming in. But in that first year bucket, it's a 3-to-1 compression. What we see in professional services, and this is anecdotal evidence I received in an in-person interview a while ago when I was just asking about legacy systems versus native cloud systems to a system integrator, and what would the deals and the opportunities look like. And the way it came back to me, the example I was given is if you were doing a major refresh of, say, Siebel CRM, that could be 10 months and about $500,000 of work. If, however, that client had decided to move off Siebel on-prem and onto, say, Salesforce, it would be a 3-month engagement and $75,000. So that is a disaggregation. It puts a lot of pressure on professional services. You have to have about 6 times the transactions for the same level of revenue. Therefore, you've got to cut the absolute sales and marketing dollars tied to each transaction, by a 6 so you can keep the same SG&A as a percentage of revenue. So there's a lot of pressure that's going on within professional services. So the fact that this is declining a point or two is not bad news in the sense that you're taking large ITO deals that used to be, say, for 10 years or the old monolithic ITO deals, and now you're transforming them into these much smaller engagements. And they're smaller engagements because you have more of the process automated. Everybody's talking about blueprints and repeated frameworks, so that if that which you did on a very hand-carved custom basis for a major bank can now be scaled because you can automate it. You've figured out the templates, and you've got to find a way to monetize that IP, but you're also working under that 6-to-1 compression ratio on services rather than a 3-to-1 compression ratio from the license to subscription shift. So that covers most of the financials in terms of the ways that we've been evaluating it. We are also looking to innovate this a little bit going forward, where we'll provide you some other granular cuts. We're not sure if we'll have time in a webinar to go through them, but in the product that we do sell to customers, we will be taking a look at some of the expense items. We're going to have to keep them combined between infrastructure and applications, because some of the things, if you have a sales representative selling the entire product portfolio, how we would disaggregate that to treat it in the benchmark we would not believe we'd be able to provide it with a great level of accuracy off the start. But we're going to begin disaggregating that componentry, and then we're going to start taking a look within the finished product around some of the aggregate revenue categories that comprise what we consider the products within infrastructure management and applications. So that'll be coming out, if not next quarter, the quarter after. We're already starting that research now that we feel we have a very good handle on the license to subscription shifts and how to model that out and keep track of the different pieces of the balance sheet and income statement you need in order to be able to look at that effectively. So with this, what we want to do is get into some of the more qualitative themes, and with that, I'll turn it over to my partner here, Andrew Smith, to take lead.
Thanks, Geoff. So in the benchmark itself, we cover 3 major scenarios each quarter, which are kind of our thematic topics that we run through the entire benchmark landscape with, offer some vendor examples as well of kind of how they're shifting to either meet the needs of customers or fight off competitive advantages, fight off the advantages of their competitors. So the first scenario is really about channel and go-to-market transformation. And if we can, hopping right into it, what we're talking about in this scenario is really how consumption-based sales models and new management architectures are changing the way vendors go to market alongside their channel partners. So this is really about how management functionality is increasingly merged into wider solution sets for customers and rolled out using new models. And this is, it's necessitating a change on both the vendor and the sales side. We see this as kind of, I guess we'd call it a merging of ecosystems where you need to consider both your partner and customer ecosystems more of the same. They need to be addressed more in line with one another to really meet the needs, meet the shifting industry requirements and shifting customer requirements. And one of the vendors that we think is doing this very well, or one of the vendors that provides a great case study so far, is Citrix, who just released the Workspace Cloud platform a couple months ago. And really, the platform is designed with partners in mind, or that's how it's meant to be designed. What Citrix is doing is kind of disaggregating the control plane from the data cloud repositories that are needed to kind of communicate and deliver application functionality on whatever device. So what I mean by that is Citrix is basically taking a hands-off approach to the workload management and just allowing partners to kind of come in, either host applications and workloads on whatever cloud or whatever ecosystem they need to, and then leverage Citrix to do the intermediary management and integration efforts necessary. So what you're looking at is a scenario where channel partners can engage customers in a different way. They can take the existing skills that they have, whether that's through Zen App or Zen Desktop, and now deliver additional Citrix services on top of that, whether it be application management, file storage, managed deployments, mobility management, whatever it is in the Workspace Cloud portfolio, partners can realistically pick up and also try and provide those as their customers need it. IBM, too, has been pursuing more flexible deployment models. As we know from tracking the company, looking over the past several quarters, the key branded middleware segment has seen a lot of challenges growing revenue, and this, I think the way that IBM is adapting to overcome that hurdle is by unbundling its traditional licenses and really allowing more flexibility across either customer buyer personas or cloud ecosystems by taking, whether it's key portions of WebSphere, key portions of Tivoli, key portions of Rational, and allowing those to kind of be unbundled from the license, from a monolithic license, and delivered in more of a composable way that resonates with both customers and partners. So if there's a partner that specializes in selling and integrating WebSphere, they can now feasibly take portions of, say, Rational or Tivoli and maybe bundle those in and provide those to customers as well. So it's really a more flexible sales model and a different way of going to market with channel partners. Geoff, anything to add before we move on?
The 2 points. The thing when Andrew and I attended the Citrix conference and came away at least impressed with the roadmap, but never confuse a clear view for a short distance, but they seem to have a pretty good idea on where they do want to go. And the thing that is unique, at least with Workspace Cloud, given that so much of their revenue is in the channel, they are not going to get into the workload hosting business. So that partner ecosystem and community, if they're looking at competing offerings, they know Citrix isn't going to compete with them on some of those margin dollars around the workload hosting aspect of enterprise IT consumption. That will be a white space opportunity for them to do as they see fit with, and that is, I've got to believe, that is going to be a draw to that partner base that will be a factor in their consideration when these partners try to decide what they want to use for an orchestration and management layer. IBM, on the other hand, quite clearly with SoftLayer and Bluemix is certainly looking to host workloads and applications. But the way they're going about it is with these, if you think of the various ways that you do DevOps and the testing and certification, particularly as we're moving into this sort of containerized software delivery where the APIs at rest or the RESTful APIs, however you want to say that, is the key glue that makes this all work together. They're setting up automated testing and configuration labs. They have, what is it, Watson API Advisor is one of them. And then in being briefed by them on containers, they talked about the directory of various container components. That they'll have a public directory on Bluemix. You can take a look at that, and then you can decide whether or not to move it over into a private directory that you can set up on your own. So one of the pieces we saw in the container research, the piece that has me most intrigued, is the idea that shadow IT is going to drive all the way down to the code level, because containerized microservices will enable labs to wind up, getting pieces put together. And if IT doesn't have a standard set of policies that they say this is how we want to develop containers, and those policies really haven't standardized in the market yet, there's a lot of competing approaches being put forth by different vendors trying to gain an edge or an advantage. There's going to be a shadow IT problem that's going to swing back for IT to address the same way PCs went out to the labs, decades ago, and then all of a sudden you needed a PC LAN administrator to take care of it because the labs couldn't figure it out. So I see a similar action going there, and IBM is looking like they're trying to stay out ahead of that with at least an automated way to help their enterprise IT stakeholders, herd the cats that are out in the lines of business.
Yeah, so Geoff, you started hitting on some of the points in the next scenario, which is well, it's fine, because the question is, what are the emerging technology, or what are the trends that are fueling or necessitating some of these changes in the channel and with vendor go-to-market efforts? So really when you talk about the emerging technologies for the management space, we're talking about containerization, microservices, DevOps, software-defined networking, software-defined storage, network functions virtualization. Pick your poison among any of those kind of emerging high-profile technologies, and you start to see kind of what some of the major drivers are between that are really transforming the management space and changing things from more static infrastructure and application deployments to a scenario where you're really abstracting most of the infrastructure elements and automating the operations, and that's where the new value lies. Piggybacking off what you were just saying, when we're looking at these emerging technologies, but the adoption is a bit slower rolling than some of the marketing pieces would have you believe, and especially when you dig into kind of the systems of record versus systems of engagement. Right. We're looking at, on the cloud-native systems of engagement side, more with digital delivery of applications and digital forms of engagement. That's where we're seeing things like, that's where we're seeing the early adopters use microservices, containers, and DevOps to really deliver the application and the underlying management and integration capabilities and automation capabilities needed. Less so on the systems of engagement side, where customers are still more concerned with, systems of record side, where customers are more concerned with integrating with existing data stores and applications, increasing productivity, reducing costs, that type of thing, on a little bit of a slower roll. So really, you're having the pressures, you have the pressure of emerging technologies, which are also creating pressures on customers and users to implement and retool what they need in terms of skills to, make this all work, make it all tick. Geoff was talking about, where you used to have IT who is just concerned with kind of keeping the lights on, the operations. Now you have IT who have to concern themselves with the billing, provisioning, and the skills and training needed to bring these emerging technologies into the ecosystem and make sure that it works from end to end. So some of the vendor highlights we were looking at during the quarter, VMware released Project Bonneville, which it builds on the existing Photon Linux operating system, but really it's about VMware pushing more and more into the container space. Now, obviously, it's built to work best on vSphere, but from what we've talked to, from our discussions with VMware and our research, they're also kind of disaggregating piece parts of that to be more flexible as well, and not just require a vSphere license to get all the functionality needed to either to leverage container management capabilities. Red Hat is doing the same thing. Red Hat released previously their Atomic Host, which was built to run on RHEL, but this quarter they released the Atomic Enterprise platform. So in addition to the container OS, you have an entire platform that Red Hat is building around containerized applications and services to kind of manage the whole thing front to back. And then what we were talking about earlier, Microsoft announced at AzureCon its support for Linux containers, and that's ahead of the formal announcement for Windows-based containers. Do you have anything to add?
There is a lot going on within this piece. It's hard to figure out where to start. I mean, as I said, I just finished it's about a 7-page text summarization of a couple of expert interviews I did and some research I've been doing in order to be smart enough to write a good online survey instrument to go query end customers as to what they're seeing in this. But I call it the reemergence of containers, because as one of the people I interviewed said, this is no different than what we were doing on mainframes to spawn the time-shared services era in the 1980s. So the first thing to do, or first thing I think of is, okay, think about mainframe capacity in the 80s, and now think of that in a handheld device or a smart sensor or an edge computing hub in Internet of Things, and think of what you're going to be able to do in this kind of environment. But what has to happen before that's all going to go on? Containers, as they were great for the developer because it gave those developers flexibility. But now, with the need to be able to distribute these throughout the hybrid cloud environment, the data infrastructure, you have to inject or the terms I used was infuse into the container or wrap it around the container, all the provisioning and sort of environment requirements, security requirements, all the aspects for security compliance, ease of use, end user familiarity, so you got to manage the app, not the device, etc. There is so much going on in here that this is where we see a big opportunity in terms of IT ops consulting around what is it that you have to do if you're going to move into a containerized environment. And as Andrew said, it's not going to be necessarily a starting point on systems of record. Will those wind up perhaps having this done to them? Yes, I think it will, particularly as they go to a cloud version with continuous updates. That's how you'll push them out. But it's truly where the rubber is going to meet the road with the systems of engagement. I say that if you take everything up to that endpoint, meaning the end user, the computing device that will access whatever it is, everything's the same up until there, you've now got a matrix that gives you 12 different flavors that you have to push out. And I say that by saying you've got to have it run on Android, Windows 10, and Apple iOS, so that's 3, and you've got to have the form factor be for a smartphone, a laptop, a tablet, and a desktop. So 3 times 4 is 12. So everything you do, you need 12 different containerized versions to get the visualization and the I/O access to the human beings. And once you've got that all solved, now start thinking about the Internet of Things and the different sensor platforms for getting the data into the pipe that runs back into the hybrid compute environment. And you can see the complexity of this and how having containers in order to manage that can become a benefit. But until the standards start to emerge, there's going to be it's going to be the wild, wild west out there for a while, I think, and hence why I want to start really hearing from enterprise IT about where are their pain points. Every action has a reaction. So if you're going to move into containers, that's your action. What is the reaction, and how are you going to have to either reorganize your people or rethink new methods for existing problems. So the new methods to existing problems is the security layer. It's tough to do perimeter defense when you have a virtualized environment. And these three firms, VMware, Red Hat, Microsoft, they're all racing on the same pieces. We virtualize compute, we virtualize store well enough for the future. The last leg of this journey is virtualizing the network and shifting how you do security.
All right, so we've talked about the sales and go-to-market challenges. We've talked about the emerging technology impacts and kind of the skills gaps that that's creating, and then the final scenario goes into the delivery and the new delivery and deployment methods, namely, how services-oriented delivery or what role that plays in kind of vendor and customer success. So really, driving adoption and helping overcome implementation hurdles. There's a critical services component that goes along here in this story, and it's critical that both vendors and their partners help guide, assist, re-educate IT in order to help them stitch together the new modules, new management capabilities necessary to kind of execute on this vision. And yesterday we were having a discussion around data management and BI, and there's kind of the new saying that, or the new strategy that you're going to it's no longer about bringing the app to the data, it's about bringing the data to the application. It's the other way around. I blew it.
It's bringing the app to the data.
It's bringing the app to the data. And really, I think you can apply that to the infrastructure space as well. You need to provision different infrastructures in a way that helps them, in a way that they're easily integrated, easily exchangeable with different applications. And I think that's kind of what's getting us excited about this space compared to the application space. Is there's a lot of change going on and a lot of possibility in order to really elevate the value of infrastructure and how it enables cloud-native applications especially. But when we're looking at the landscape, looking at the benchmarked vendors, there's really no clear winner yet. There's no vendor that certainly has figured out what to do and is running away from the pack. But it's really, that spells an opportunity for many competitors. And the way we think about it is you can break down the strategy into kind of two major camps, where we see a lot of the large multi-line players like IBM leveraging their internal services capabilities and bolstering those capabilities to really facilitate customer adoption of their solutions. And another, the key part of this is having large cash reserves to rely on. And, just as an example, I wanted to bring up IBM, who's had 6 acquisitions in the past 5 months. You've got, in June, they acquired Blue Box for the OpenStack capabilities. In July, it was Compose for database as a service capabilities. In August, Merge Healthcare for the vertical-specific software components. In September, Strong Loop and Meteorix for mobile API management and Workday consulting, respectively. And then most recently, just a couple of days ago, CleverSafe, the object-based storage software. So, looking at what IBM is doing is really kind of a foreshadowing what's happening with many other vendors in the space, but on a much smaller scale. IBM is very visible, large-scale changes that you can track and understand kind of how customer buying preferences are changing what vendors are doing. And so we're seeing a lot of the larger vendors use a strategy to buy their way into a better position with customers to kind of meet their needs. And then on the other side of the equation, the smaller pure plays that are involved in our benchmark, what we're seeing is vendors like Salesforce and ServiceNow try to kind of elevate their value with customers by not just taking the traditional route to IT or HR or sales, and try and really bolster their platforms to have a farther reach to different customer sets, and they're doing this with industry-tailored, really industry-tailored solutions. ServiceNow, for example, they're really expanding the portfolio to cater to not just IT but LOBs, and this is, it's a new entry point. It's higher value engagements, but really the challenge there is that it requires greater investments on, continued investments on the sales side, kind of to figure out that new engagement with customers and be successful there. So some more of the customer highlights. What I've been tracking, what I think is interesting, is HP's release of Project Synergy. It's an initiative that encompasses what they're calling their composable infrastructure solutions, which is, once again, disaggregated pools of compute, storage, and networking, all managed under one view. And this is kind of, you'll hear Geoff say this a lot. It's about abstracting the IP from the silicon. This is managing to that end. It's what HP is doing to try and elevate the value of one view and integrate with a larger ecosystem of software and services providers. And they're not doing this alone either. They launched a composed infrastructure partner ecosystem, which includes the likes of Ansible, Puppet, Docker, and Chef, so the container and configure management vendors of the day. So you don't need to say any more about that. They're targeting the key customer pain points and the providers who can cater to those. Dell Software and Red Hat, I'll mention again, are both taking kind of a reference architecture / blueprints approach to just help customers and SIs overcome those implementation hurdles more easily. Like Geoff said, it's about creating repeatable frameworks, so you're reducing the cost, reducing the time, and driving to customer value and scaling it as well. So, Geoff, anything else?
There is so much taking place, it's hard to organize your thoughts. This is a key area where there is a lot that is happening, because right now a line I use often is technology adoption isn't the hurdle right now, it's human adaptation to what technology is out there that's the hurdle. We the IT administrators, the developers, the end users, everybody has to sort of take a step back and look at what we can do today with what exists. We're trying to figure out how to get that all stitched together to generate business value. So you have on one hand the need to drive cost out. So that's where you've got the repeatable frameworks and the simplicity, so you can get it together. When you bake in containers, however, you've got to add about 10 to 15% more management time or more labor time for all the sort of testing that has to shift earlier. Shift left is the way it was has been uttered. Shift sooner in the life cycle process as you're doing it, because of the speed and the nimbleness at which you're doing these continuous updates. So you have this whole range of factors that are destabilizing all the conventional business models that are out there in our industry. And then when you take in analytics, the speed at which this transformation cycle is going to work its way through our industry and upset the leaders and laggards and have people wind up out of business and new things start up, all that volatility is going to happen in about half the time it's happened in the prior transformation cycles I've seen in the 30-odd years I've been serving as a color commentator on the industry. It's a fascinating time to be where I am. It's not a very good time to be where you guys are. There's a lot of pressure going on in what's taking place here. And with that, I'll leave it open for questions. We've got about 12 minutes left on the hour. We would ask too, if we do give you a survey at the end, we welcome your comments as to the value of this, or things you would like to see added. Even negative commentary is better than none, so that we can improve this for you and for our audience. But with that, let's open it up for some questions.
All right, so yeah, just a reminder, please send any questions through the Q&A function.
No, sorry.
Not the chat function. All right, let's get started. All right, first question. What do you see as major revenue drivers across different geographies?
Okay, that's in the aggregate. We do track that in the benchmark, and we cover that by the regions as you would expect: Americas, Latin America, and Americas, which includes Latin America, EMEA, and then APJ. And what's been happening is EMEA and APJ are declined. What are they? Declined about 11% each year over year, and Americas was up 5 points. So we're hearing all the macroeconomic challenges going on in EMEA and APJ between the China economy, which really, when you talk the China economy, you need to talk about the two economies, the export economy and the consumer economy. The government is making a shift back to a program to bolster the consumer economy, but a lot of people think it's unsustainable, so you wonder if they're just kicking the can down the road to a big bang there. So you have that whole macro layer going on at APJ with China as the 300-pound gorilla in that market that will have some shifts. On the EMEA side, it's a little bit different, although it's still unstable from a macroeconomic environment between the sovereign, the debt provisioning among the EU community countries, while the problem is that you really have taken away monetary policy as a government lever to resolve that issue. So there's some challenges and struggles there. But so now sort of everything I just said, set that aside. The other piece is to take a look at where's innovation going to hit. Innovation is going to hit close to corporate. Most big business has corporate sitting in the United States. Hence, you're going to see a lot of the first mover innovation be done close to home in the Americas. Then when that has picked up, they'll roll it out into the other geos. So that's one of the pieces, or one of the themes we take a look at. So we're tracking in the benchmark. We're taking standard GDP growth estimates from public sources, and we cite that as a compare against the revenue compares that we also provide. So that's a little bit that we give you.
All right, next question. Can you speak a bit about your expectations around M&A within the industry? Any specific technologies, et cetera, that may be more active than others?
That's a great question, because I think the nature of acquisition is shifting less from these monolithic acquisition mergers where you're taking somebody that might have, say, a bit of a declining revenue stream, but it's a good cash cow, and if you can merge it into your own sales channel, you can drive out incremental revenue gains. I think the speed at which these things are going to evolve is going to shift large companies away from picking up these big acquisitions and more get them almost using M&A as just a quick make, build, or buy on the R&D when you need to innovate. The speed at which you need to innovate, I was at a briefing, I can't remember, I won't say which vendor it was, but it was their head of their M&A activity talking about how they are shifting it. So I won't divulge the name. But what they were talking about is you put some angel investment into some development funds, and you see what these little firms are doing, and you actually have to make the decision whether or not you're going to buy them ahead of them even having a finished product. It's gotten that fast. You can't wait for them to be out in the market improving. You've got to get at them quicker. So I think you're going to see a lot of these kind of almost R&D acquisitions rather than product acquisitions. And you'll see it around things like the network virtualization is one where I would expect a lot of disruption and consolidation going on. There's going to be a lot of that around security. There's a lot of emerging startups. If you think of traditional legacy security was firewall security, new security has to isolate the application or do identity management of the end user rather than mobile device management. The way it was listed is no end user would want the Mission Impossible smoking of their smartphone because the corporate apps would jeopardize and they lose all their pictures from their smartphone. So you got to think of the smartphone itself as partitioned, and you've only, business IT only has their purview on that piece. That's all shaking out. There's no sort of magical de facto standard or bullet in that regard. So I think you're going to see a lot of that moving on.
Yeah, and Geoff, I would add, I think the divestitures and and breaking apart is just as interesting in the IAM space as the M&A activity, because you have Symantec breaking apart the Veritas business. You had CompuWare breaking apart parts of its business. HP obviously splitting up. Who else am I missing? Citrix possibly divesting the Go-To product line. So, you know, not only as important as M&A is within the industry, there's also the kind of the opposite strategy of trying to break apart pieces of the portfolio with different, you know, different margin profiles, different growth profiles, and try to use those to best benefit specific products moving forward. And then the only other thing I would offer on M&A is, I mentioned before, these, you know, some of these popular configuration management vendors like Puppet, Chef, and Ansible. I kind of am looking at some of those guys to possibly get bought up in the next couple of years, especially as OpenStack adoption increases and vendors, you know, more traditional vendors, IBM, Oracle, Cisco, either buy or create those capabilities. I think the next logical move would be to go to the management guys like Puppet, like Chef, like Ansible, and maybe pick up that IP. So I think that's a possibility.
Right. It's basically anybody that has an innovative, standards-based solution that you could rapidly scale through your existing infrastructure to provide. And when I mean infrastructure, I don't mean necessarily hardware infrastructure. I mean your sales go-to-market engine. I mean your customer base, your partner base. When you can scale it through that operation, you'll pick it up. But the days of, you know, picking up sort of declining assets, it was frankly sort of the playbook that Computer Associates had in the 1980s of just picking up all these different software applications so that their direct reps were almost like software distributor reps. Here's the line card, what do you want to buy? And it didn't matter if it worked together or not. It was just they were adding more to the same sales pipe to just keep pushing it down the channel. Those days, I don't think that kind of M&A activity in this disruptive cycle is going to do you a lot of good, particularly if it's on the physical hardware side where the margins are eroding. And as soon as we fully virtualize that the compute infrastructure, and by compute infrastructure I'm talking about the inner relations between the CPU, the storage, the I/O device, and the network pipe that moves it around. The more we virtualize that, the more we commoditize that, and that's happening fast. So therefore, any profit forecast you might get by picking up some of these things, I would suggest that you probably have to steepen the decline of that curve when you're doing the forecast. And there's very few people inside, corporate enterprises that are going to come forward to management and say, yeah, we think we can manage this business to only shrink 30% next year. That isn't what they want to hear. And I think that's part of the problem is people are underestimating how rapidly their core is going to start to disintegrate. And with that, that's actually a good tie-in to the next question. Do you have any projections on where the traditional on-prem perpetual license with maintenance SaaS subscription revenue percentages will end up? That's a great question. I think you have to split it in half. It was you got to think of it as two different things. I think, well, it's kind of obvious when I say it, but sort of the new, the third platform apps, the native cloud apps, those are pretty much going to start out almost 100% subscription. What I think you need to look at is within those core pieces of traditional databases. I mean, we already know the infrastructure management layer and the, massive development tools licenses that mean all programmers must standardize around A, B, or C type of methodologies. That group's going to go away rapidly. We're seeing that with Bluemix, which I was talking to Andrew about this before we got on the call, where in the old days, you could sell shelfware and then just move on to the next account. Today, it's got to be that it's on the cloud and you can use any of these components, and then you need somebody engaging them to sell them on the value and the benefits of, oh, you're using, modules A and B. Do you realize if you use C, you can get the following, and educate them to keep using more and more and grow the expansion rather than just having that license. But I would believe in the next 5 to 10 years, the subscription side will exceed, it will be more than half of it, would be the way I would guesstimate it off the top of my head based on the question. We're running up against time. We would ask as you leave that if you could provide some feedback for us. As I said, be as honest as you can. Let us know what we did well and what we didn't do so well, because we continually want to improve the product for our stakeholders. And thank you for your time.
Yeah, and just one reminder for anyone who came in after my introduction, I will be following up with all of you via email with the link for today's recording as well as the slides. So be on the lookout for that tomorrow. So otherwise, I'd like to thank Geoff and Andrew for your time today, and thank you everyone for attending and for your questions, and have a great afternoon. Thanks.